Okay, good evening, everyone. Sorry about the late start, but the Zoom account was being used for another meeting, and they just finished that, so we'll get started with this one. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we give you thanks this evening for your loving kindness. Thank you for the work of your Holy Spirit upon the hearts of men and women whom you choose to use to do your bidding. We ask, O Lord, that as these individuals speak for you, speak on behalf of you, may we understand your plan, your means, and your method. But in the end, may Jesus Christ be praised. May his people be edified. We ask in his precious name. Amen. 1 second. Oh, okay. And so our topic this evening, meeting Ellen White. If you have a question, I'll be doing some juggling, but if you have a question, can put it in the chat as the case might be, and I'll try and monitor it. And toward the ending, we can then open the microphone so persons can speak if they have a question. So here we are meeting Ellen White. Basically, what I'll be looking at is the woman herself. Very often we look at we tend to focus more on the office, forgetting that there's an individual behind the office, and that's very important. And so let's go through a good bit of my information. This was the genesis of it all. Walking with Ellen White, Her Everyday Life as a Wife, Mother, and Friend by George Knight. He has a series. 1 second. That was Walking with Ellen White. Then you have Ellen White's World, fascinating times that look at the times in which she lived. Let's see if I can fix this where you can see it without the glare. Okay, and then he has another one of meeting Ellen White, a fresh look at her writings and major themes. So there are 3 of them. I think it's just 3 that he has. They're very good. I purchased these, 1998. Didn't realize it was that long ago. And I've been just really started reading them. I've done some browsing, but never really got into it the way I did in preparing for this seminar. So let's get a quick background on Ellen White. For those of you who are new and not familiar with Seventh-day Adventist teachings, etc., Ellen White is a woman born Ellen Hammond, November 26, 1827. She married her husband in 1846, died July 16, 1915. She is considered by Seventh-day Adventists as a prophetess to the remnant church, based on her writings and the guidance and counsel that she has given us. Without her foresight and her leading, the Adventist church most likely would not have the educational or the healthcare system that it has today. We have one of the largest educational system in Protestantism or outside of Roman Catholicism. Our healthcare system is extensive also. And so all of that is because of her vision, where she felt the Lord was leading her, and she gave instructions, sometimes even telling him which property to buy and how much of it to get. So that's a very brief background on her. I am going to skip this section. Well, let's deal with the marriage, but there's a section I'll skip for now because I'm coming to a video on that. And I'm going to look at her counsel to some newlyweds. It says Daniel Bourdieu had just gotten married. He had to postpone his honeymoon departure until the next day. That night, the newlyweds shared a room next to the Whites in the home of the family that hosted the wedding. At 9 p.m., Ellen went to retire for the night and discovered a nervous groom pacing back and forth in the hallway outside his closed bedroom door. Mistress White tactfully said to him, "Daniel, inside that room, there is a frightened young woman in bed, totally petrified with fear. Now you go into her right now and you love her and you comfort her. And Daniel, you treat her gently and you treat her tenderly and you treat her lovingly. It will do her good." Then she added with a bit of smile on her face, "And Daniel, it will do you good too." And so I read this. This was done by someone whom George Knight interviewed actually. He interviewed someone, individual who had actually known Ellen White. All of the people who actually saw her are now dead now. But this was an interview based on someone who had actually known her. And so you see, she was not the, crude, this cold, stiff, formal person that some actually believe her to be. She was a very practical woman. I could not find the passage anymore, but I'll probably have to look it up and get it to you at another point on some of the statements that she made. I want to look something else at Ellen White as an individual. And this relates to, okay, that was taken Walking with Ellen White, page 22. Let's look at diet and health. Again, many Seventh-day Adventists have done a disservice to her by taking out some of the strongest statements out of her writing, picking them out of their context, and ignoring other statements, sometimes one paragraph down, that speaks differently because it does not line up with that which they want to push on individuals. So let's look at some of it. She says, "I eat the most simple food, prepared in the most simple way. For months, my principal diet has been vermicelli," I forgot to look that up, "and canned tomatoes cooked together. This I eat with zwieback, which is a type of bread or cereal. I don't remember which one. Then I have also stewed fruit of some kind and sometimes lemon pie. Dried corn cooked with milk or little cream is another dish that I sometimes use. But the other members of my family do not eat the same things that I do." Excuse me. "I do not hold myself up as a criterion for them. I leave each one to follow his own ideas as to what is best for him. I bind no one else's conscience by my own. One person cannot be a criterion for another in the matter of eating. It is impossible to make one rule for all to follow. There are those in my family who are very fond of beans, while to me beans are poison. Butter is never placed on my table, but if the members of my family choose to use a little butter away from the table, they are at liberty to do so. Our table is set twice a day, but if there are those who desire something to eat in the evening, there is no rule that forbids them from getting it. No one complains or goes from our table dissatisfied. A variety of food that is simple, wholesome, and palatable is always provided. And this is letter 127, 1904. And I'm going to share some information with you shortly that some of her strongest statements were written toward the ending of her life. Let's look at something else. The carrying of things to extreme is a matter to be dreaded. It always results in my being compelled to speak to prevent matters from being misunderstood, so that the world will not have cause to think that Seventh-day Adventists are a body of extremists. Watch her language. Very practical woman. When we seek to pull people out of the fire on the one hand, the very words which then have to be spoken to correct evils are used to justify indulgence on the other hand. May the Lord keep us from human tests and extremes. Here's what she was facing. Her husband recognized this as early as 1868. You have some who are lagging behind, we would say, in the health message. And she would give some strong statements to speed them up. But then those who are running way ahead would use this and say, see it, this is what the prophet, the servant of the Lord says. And they would go on the far right and deep end. Then she would have to speak to that group and say, look here, slow down, take it easy. And those on the left who are dragging their feet would say, see, she says, take it easy, don't go too fast, don't be so rigid. And so she was constantly trying to balance between these two extremes. And we still have the two extremes when it comes to Ellen White today. Now, here's a document that someone did by Ron Graybill, Development of Adventist Thinking on Clean and Unclean Meats. And you're going to discover something that may come as a surprise to some of you, but it's worth it. This one is found in manuscript release number 852. Okay, you can see it now. You may have to drag my picture over or your picture over on the other side of the screen for the time being. The dietary distinctions between clean and unclean foods based on Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14 is generally understood and accepted among, let me make it a little larger, those of you using phones. Okay. Is generally understood and accepted among Adventists today. Unlike the ceremonial laws of the Old Testament, which pointed to Christ, or the civil laws which governed the theocracy, these health laws were based on natural law and thus not merely applicable to one age and time. Thus, even among Adventists who eat meat, these unclean meats were avoided. Okay, 19th century Adventists, however, talking about 1800s, did not generally accept this distinction between clean and unclean meats based on Levitical law, even though they clearly condemned pork. The prohibition on pork was the first to be established, but even that took time. Before the health message came to Ellen White in 1863, she and James White both discouraged believers who attempted to enforce a prohibition on pork. We do not by any means believe that the Bible teaches that pork is proper, that its proper use in the gospel dispensation is sinful, James White wrote in 1850. So in other words, he's saying, look here, we're in the gospel dispensation, Christ has come, we don't think it's sinful. This is what he wrote in 1850. 1858, a brother in New England, probably S.N. Haskell, was again trying to discourage the use of pork, make its use a test of loyalty to God's word. Ellen White wrote, if it is the duty of the church to abstain from swine's flesh, God will discover it to more than 2 or 3. That's something important that we need to remember when individuals want to force everyone to think like they do. If it's something where a path where the Lord is leading his church, based on this principle, I'm taking this as a principle, the Lord will reveal it to more than 2 or 3 individuals, so just a small group of individuals. After the health reform vision, of course, Mrs. White did not come out against the use of pork, arguing that it produced acrophula, leprosy, and cancerous humors. It is significant that she and other Adventists who wrote against the use of pork up until 1866 argued strictly from a health standpoint. In other words, just because some biblical arguments were used to reinforce the ban on pork, we cannot conclude at that point Adventists were well on their way to a full-blown teaching on the distinction between clean and unclean foods. I would say this, at the time and perhaps into the we're already in the mid-1800s, probably heading into late 1800s, your understanding of the distinction between clean and unclean foods probably surpassed almost anything most of our founders and others understood, because now it is well developed. Back then, it was not. T.M. Canwright alludes to Deuteronomy 14:8, and the swine, because it divided the hoof, yet chew it not the cud, it is unclean unto you. Ye shall not eat of their flesh, nor touch their dead carcass. But Canwright makes no mention of other unclean meats and makes no use of the further material in Deuteronomy 14 on the subject. When he does mention oysters in the article in the following year, he mentions their alleged powers to excite certain kinds of feelings and introduces no biblical argument. So they had a ban on pork, but they still ate a whole lot of the other unclean foods at that point. 1870, W.C. Gage undertake to refute a rival Adventist periodical, which took exception to the scriptural assertion that the swine is unclean. But Gage does not cite either Deuteronomy 14 or Leviticus 11. In fact, Gage remarks, if the scriptures fail to settle a question, let reason have a sway. Examine the animal and see its filthy habits. So here it is. Some Adventist periodicals were fighting back on the whole thing that the Bible is saying pork is unclean. This guy, Gage, is saying, look here, look at the swine. He's using it from a health standpoint. He does discuss some of the Bible's testimony on pork, but his article is far from being a contribution to a broad understanding of the Bible teaching on clean and unclean meats, being as it is heavy with naturalistic arguments and exclusively interested in the pork question. James White, in an 1872 article on swine's flesh, does show the beginnings of a wider application of Levitical law. He does mention Deuteronomy 14:8 again, and he does seek to refute the arguments that the prohibition on swine was a merely Jewish one and therefore not binding on Christians. So he's saying, look, this is for everyone. He reminds his readers that the distinction between clean and unclean was recognized in the Bible long before the existence of a single Jew. Still, the whole thrust of his argument to discredit the pig, not to establish general categories of clean and unclean meats. He does not discuss the biblical criteria for the distinction of all. So even then, 1872, their thing was against swine, but a little oyster was okay. If they had crawfish or lobster, the general distinction between clean and unclean meats in Adventist circles remained undeveloped throughout the 19th century, which is 1800s. While Adventists argued vigorously against pork, the weight of their argument continued to be carried by physiological criteria. Uriah Smith explicitly rejected the applicability of the Mosaic distinction. We believe there is better ground on which to rest the prohibition on pork than the ceremonial law of the former dispensation. For if we take the position that that law is still binding, we must accept it all, and then we shall have more on our hands than we can easily dispose of. For Adventists in the 19th century, then all meat eating was discouraged, while the eating of pork was virtually banned. Other meats which we would consider unclean were not seen apparently in the same light as pork. So pork was banned completely, but you could eat other meat. And look to your left. Now, let's see if I'm, okay, good. To your left, this is something I want you may want to get a hold of. The Ellen G. White Encyclopedia. When you read this encyclopedia, they will tell you that for early Adventists, meat did not include marine life, fish, for example. So fish wasn't meat. I was surprised when I learned that there, when I found that out. But that's something we can look at another time. Once when Ellen White was ill, her son, W.C. White, I think that'd be Willie White, reports that she was encouraged to drink a little oyster broth to settle her stomach. She is said to have tried a spoonful or two, but then refused the rest. There is, however, evidence that at one point in her life, Mrs. White most likely ate some oysters. In 1882, when she was living in Harrodsburg, California, she wrote a letter to her daughter-in-law, Mary Kelsey White, in Oakland. I think this is Willie's wife, in which she made the following request. Yes, Mary, if you can get me a good box of herrings, fresh ones, please do so. Herrings is fish. These last ones that Willie got are bitter and old. If you can buy cans, say half a dozen cans of good tomatoes, please do so. We shall need them. If you can get a few cans of good oysters, get them, because they didn't consider fish, or I guess marine life, as meat. And some people still don't see it. They tell you they don't eat meat, but they eat fish. Ellen White kept it no secret that under difficult circumstances, as when she traveled or when she was entertained in her travels, she ate some meat. The book Counsels on Diet and Food, published in 1938, carries her account of her relation to the use of meat after the health reform vision was given to her as follows. I had once cut meat out of my bill of fare. After that, I was at times placed where I was compelled to eat a little meat. 1 second for me, please. Sorry about that. Okay, published in 1938, carries the account of her relation to the use of meat after the health reform vision was given to her as follows. I had once cut meat out of my bill of fare. After that, I was at times placed where I was compelled to eat a little meat. This is in harmony with her earlier published statement, which appeared in 1890 in the book Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene reading. When I could not obtain the foods I needed, I have sometimes eaten a little meat, but I am becoming more and more afraid of it. One of the things when reading or studying Ellen White's writings, try to find it where it was originally penned, because not all of the time the compilations give you the date. So you will notice here in 1890, she was saying up to 1890, sometimes she eats a little meat, but she is not too crazy about it. So, but beyond this, there is evidence of some laxness in the 70s and 80s, which allowed a little meat to appear on a table when it may not have been essential. Given the difficulties of refrigerating and transporting food in the 19th century, it was a much greater problem than to gain an adequate diet without using flesh foods. In the early 1890s, Mrs. White expressed her distaste for meat while en route to Australia. So she's traveling by boat. She wrote, "They have an abundance of food in the meat line, prepared in different ways. But as I do not enjoy a meat diet, it leaves me rather meager fare." In Australia, 1894, she took a stand to eat no more meat, a position from which there was no retreat through the rest of her life. She writes to it thus, "Since the camp meeting in 1894, I have absolutely banished meat from my table. It is an understanding that whether I am at home or abroad, nothing of this kind is to be used in my family or come upon my table. I have had much representation before my mind in the night season on the subject." So in other words, she was deeply impressed about the subject. Ellen White's own understanding of clean and unclean distinctions seemed to have grown strong over time. In 1864, she did note in passing that Noah was allowed to eat clean beasts after the flood. And in 1890, when Patriarchs and Prophets were published, she noticed that Samson's parents had been instructed to withhold from him every unclean thing. This distinction between articles of food as clean and unclean was not, she said, a merely ceremonial and arbitrary regulation, but was based on sanitary principles. Notice now. Furthermore, the marvelous vitality of the Jewish people for thousands of years could be traced to this distinction. I'm going to skip some of this. Up to this point, this author is saying, Mrs. White never explicitly declared that the general distinction between clean and unclean meats was one which Seventh-day Adventists were still bound to observe. Her statements commending the Jewish practice certainly encourage that position, but never make it explicit. Up to 1883, W.H. Littleton, in a question and answer column in the Review, said he was not sure whether oysters would properly come under the prohibition on unclean foods found in Leviticus 11. If they did, he said, it would be because there was some natural reason. It was also just at this time that Uriah Smith expressed his strong disavowal of the application of the Mosaic law in this matter, as mentioned above. Okay, let me see. I'm going to skip again. You'll have to read it. You can find this online. J.N. Loftbird said all shellfish, including oysters, were objectionable as they contained very little nutrition and was difficult to digest. 1891, Kellogg, reacting energetically to some favorable comments on oysters by scientists, condemned the creatures as difficult to digest, the lowest of scavengers, and apt to contain a deadly poison, thyroxtoxin. Compared with the amount of material in the literature against pork, however, the objection to oysters and other unclean meats is so minuscule as to hardly be noticed. And we should never base our own decisions concerning healthful living on the example of other human beings. Mrs. White made this point clear enough during an extemporaneous talk in Battle Creek. Now, remember, in 1894, she took a firm stand. She says, Sister White has not had meat in her house or cooked in any line on any dead flesh for years and years. From 1894 to 1901. Someone type in the chat, how many years is that? 1894 to 1901. How many years is that? Math was never my strong point, so just to make sure. Anyone got the answer? Okay, I got 7 years. Anyone got a different answer? But that gives you an idea what we're looking at. Now, Sister White, this is what she says. And here is the basis of some people's health reform. Now I have told you, Sister White did not eat meat. Now I want you not to eat meat because Sister White does not eat it. Well, I would not care a farthing for anything like that. If you have not got any better conviction, you won't eat meat because Sister White does not eat any. If I am the authority, I would not give a farthing for your health reform. What I want is that every one of you should stand in your individual dignity before God and your individual consecration to God, that the soul temple should not be dedicated. Soul temple should be dedicated to God. And again, A.S.N. Haskell, he was the first to argue a clear biblical prohibition, I have trouble pronouncing this word, on all unclean meats, making full use of the prohibitions of Leviticus 11. 1903 wrote, in many things, the Bible laid down principles, and we are left to exercise our own judgment in this matter. Okay. And one of the things I made mention of, it was after you find, when you read some of her very strong statements, they were written after she took this stand in 1894. And that's why I say, when you are studying, go through, try and find the statements. If the original document is not cited, where it came from, like in the compilation, then go try and find the original statement wherever you can. So I'm going to stop this one here and go back to our slides. So that gives you an idea as to what we're working with when it comes to the teaching of clean and unclean foods. When it comes to recreation, one of the things that Knight points out very early in his book is that people always saw her as a killjoy. She never smiled. And he goes on to explain that photography was in its early days, and it was not the point and click that we have today. Said it took a while, and so it's much easier to hold a straight face as opposed to holding a smile for a minute, 2 minutes. I know I have trouble when they ask me to do that. And so you find it like that. But let's look at the type of person she was when it comes to recreation. Adventist Home, page 499. I do not condemn the simple exercise of playing ball, but this, even in its simplicity, may be overdone. She talked about the gymnasium. Say sometimes people hurt themselves by doing extraneous exercises. So she did not have a problem with physical activity, even in playing, but being intemperate with it. Brother Chitin Don took out a number of us on the water in his boat. And she goes on to name all of these people, myself and the little girls. We remain on the water, this is the sea, and beach all day, sail out of the Golden Gate upon the ocean. There was no wind to take us out of the harbor. Charlie employed a steam tug to take us out. One of his friends managed a steamboat. And Mary and Emma were seasick. I was not sick at all. The waves ran high as we were tossed up and down so very grandly. I was highly elevated in my feelings, but had no words to say to anyone. It was grand, the spray dashing over us, the watchful captain giving his orders, the ready hands to obey. The wind was blowing strong, and I never enjoyed anything so much in my life. I don't know about you, but if it was me, I'd have been one of those laying down in the bunk, or standing by the rail trying not to feed my lunch to the fishes. She apparently was not seasick. Manuscript 7, page 281, or letter 5, written in 1876. So she was not a killjoy personality, and we'll see some more of these as we go on. She is witty and cunning. The work of recovery, talking about her husband, continued at a steady with slow pace. James White, had a stroke. Thursday and Friday, July 18 and 19, were busy days for James White, for it was time to get in the hay. He arranged with the neighbors to cut the hay and expected to invite them to help him get it in. But Ellen saw a good opportunity to draw her husband into further activity. While the hay was drying, she got them to cut it, but she decided he wanted them to help him gather it and stack it up. While the hay was drying, she slipped away and visited the neighbors. Through inquiry, she learned that they were pressed with their own work, but were planning to help James get his hay in. To each she said, "When he sends for you, tell him that you have just told me that you are pressed with your own work and it is not convenient to leave your own work, as you will suffer loss if you do." Life Sketches, page 357. The neighbors were very reluctant to do this, but when she explained her plan to encourage James in activity, they agreed to cooperate. The story is told in several places, but here's the account as related in Life Sketches of James and Ellen White, published 1888. When the call was made for help, all the neighbors declared themselves too busy to respond. It was necessary that the hay be secured at once, and Elder White was sorely disappointed, but Mistress White was not at all despondent. She resolutely said, "Let us show the neighbors that we can attend to the work ourselves. Willie and I will rake the hay and pitch it on the wagon, if you will load it and drive the team." To this he consented, but how could they make the start? The farm was new and they had no barn. Mistress White volunteered to build the stack if her husband would pitch up the hay, while Willie would be raking for another load. Some of the neighbors, as they passed by, were surprised to see Ellen White, the woman who spoke each week to a house full of people, treading down the hay and building a stack. Reporting his activities for this week, James wrote, "I have worked from 6 to 12 hours each day, and I've enjoyed blessed sleep from 6 to 9 hours each night. My work has been haying, plowing, grading about the house, hoeing, and putting down carpets," as reported in Review and Herald 1869. And so that gives you an idea. She saw that the physical exercise would be good, and she went out of her way to convince the neighbors to not help him whenever he asked. So this was a very practical woman, but she was very cunning, we would say. Humor. This is the one that some people have a problem with. They say Jesus never smiled, but he cried. You ask Nelson Bain, he'll tell you he thinks Jesus made jokes. So let's go. When Willie was a baby, I had no babysitter, and I paraphrase this. So I had a Battle Creek carpenter make me a cradle on rocker arms, just exactly the width of the pulpit in the Battle Creek Tabernacle. I would then place Willie in the cradle before the worship service began. And while I was preaching, I would use my right foot to rock the cradle to keep him asleep so that he did not disturb the service. So don't blame Willie. I was the one who taught him to sleep in church. This was her adult son she was talking about. She's standing up preaching and he's sleeping. And the members saw it and they started snickering. And when she found out, she related the story, how she would rock his little cradle when he was a baby to keep him sleeping in church. So she's saying, I taught him how to sleep in church. So that is a good example of her humor. Let's look at another one when relating to clothing. Sisters, when about their work, should not put on clothing which would make them look like images to frighten the crows from the corn. It is more gratifying to their husbands and children to see them in a becoming, well-fitted attire than it can be for mere visitors or strangers. So basically what she was saying is this, and you read it in Adventist Home, you will dress better than that for visitors and strangers, so why can't you dress up to make your to please your husband and your children. And that's the basic concept, is that talking, I guess, for housewives, I guess, or ladies. You know, you hear men talk about it, they make joke about it all the time. Ladies who are listening, take it seriously. He's out working, you working at home in the house. He comes home, you still got on your night frock, as they say, your hair tie up with head cloth or them little tingham cap, whatever, what they call it, them little black cap or whatever, still walking around dragging flip-flop or something. But what she's saying, if somebody was to come to your house, you would quickly change. So she's saying, hey, change for your husband. Look in a certain way. Don't look as if you're trying to frighten the crows from the corn. So she had a sense of humor in making a point, getting a point across. Now here's another one. She had to, her and her daughter-in-law had to cross this creek, which was swollen near Samoa. Her daughter-in-law tells the story. So another man took my 4-month-old daughter in his arms and held an umbrella over her to shelter her from the sun. Then he motioned for me to get on his back. I so scrambled on his back and wrapped my arms and legs around him, and off we went. They had already formed the human link and lifted Ellen across, okay? The daughter-in-law and the 4-month-old daughter, the granddaughter were last. Mother White laughed so hard at that sight that she couldn't stop. She laughed until she fell off the rock, walking with Ellen White, page 20. So she wasn't a killjoy, so to speak. She had a sense of humor. She knew how to laugh, how to enjoy life. And that is a side that people usually don't think about it when they see her. I'm going to move quickly. Her library. Ellen White had an extensive library. There are some Adventists who believe they should only read 70 Adventist books. She did not take that view. Now, here's an example. Okay, this is taking too long to refresh. So I'll go to the browser and show you. Okay, here we go. A bibliography of a private and office library. This is a total of 78 pages. Now, it may be a challenge to see if you are using a phone, so let's see if I can help you. No, it's not getting any larger on my phone. So we'll just have to work with it as is. But let me put the link in the chat for you. You can look it up at another point. She had Adventist Literature Review and Sabbath Herald, The Women of Israel, The Laws of Health, Evidence and of the Authenticity, Inspiration, and come on, okay, there we go. And Canon of the Holy Scriptures, Thoughts on Family Worship, Presbyterian Board, Commentary on the Prophecies of Isaiah, Scribbens and Sons, New Testament for English readers, so she was not a King James woman, King James only woman, History of Europe from the commencement of the French Revolution, which I imagine would have aided her in the writing of the Great Controversy, American Biographical History of Eminent and Self-Made Men, Annals of the English Bible. So when you look at this, she was well read. As a matter of fact, she recommended one of the books that she used to help in writing the book Desire of Ages. It was recommended that Adventists give it to their children. It was sold in the equivalent of their ABC as Christmas gifts. Okay, just scanning through this. Collection of interesting tracts explaining several important points of scripture and doctrine. Official Journal of the Colorado Exposition, Dictionary of the Holy Bible for general use, Gleanings for the Young, British and Foreign Bible Society, Help to the Gospels, New Something American Sunday School Union. As I said, she was very practical. She had a very wide library. So even though she was limited to third grade education, that doesn't mean that she limited herself to only literature that were written by Seventh-day Adventists. And so you can look that up too whenever you're ready in your own time, because it's going to take a while. We're just on page 13. So let's go back to our slides in that case. She was a very practical individual, and I want to emphasize this. When I came into the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1984, there was a lot of discussion, and the way things went was this. You would have a discussion at AY. Someone would say, what did Ellen White say? And somebody would give a quote, say, this is what Ellen White said. Discussion over, finished, shut down, closed. One of the things that was used, and many parents were tortured with this, parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached the age of 8 or 10 years of age. In the Bahamas, we could beg to be excused because the government said 5 years of age, have to be in school. But this was brought, this was pressed upon parents. There was a situation where individuals opened a school. You had some parents who could not stay home, and so they went to work and the children played in the streets. After all, Ellen White said, look here, 8 to 10 years old, stay home. Somebody said, bring your children in. So there was this debate. And so what happens? Finally, they asked her, and she was the one who settled the question for them. School board was called. Those are the names of the persons there. For years, much instruction has been given me in regard to the importance of maintaining firm discipline in the home. I have tried to write out this instruction and to give it to others. In one of the forthcoming volumes of my writings will be published considerable additional material on the training of children. Those who assume the responsibilities of parenthood should first consider whether they will be able to surround their children with proper influences. The home is both a family church and a family school. The atmosphere of the home should be so spiritual that all the members of the family, parents and children, will be blessed and strengthened by their association with one another. Heavenly influences are educational. Those who are surrounded by such influences are being prepared for entrance into the school above. Mothers should be able to instruct their little ones wisely during the earlier years of childhood. If every mother were capable of doing this and would take time to teach her children the lessons they should learn in early life, then all children could be kept in the home or school until they are 8 or 9 or 10 years of age. And that is the condition. Subjunctive clause, if every mother were capable of doing this. First of all, mother would have to be at home. In that day, many of the women stayed home, the man went out to work. That was logical. But mother would have to be home. She would need to have the education to teach her children. There are many mothers who cannot teach their children up to that level of grades 8 or 9 or 10. And so she basically said, look here, since there is, they're not getting the education, take them into the school. She goes on. Many who enter the marriage relation fail of realizing all the sacred responsibilities that motherhood brings. Many are sadly lacking in disciplinary power. In many homes, there's but little discipline. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Children who are surrounded by these unfortunate conditions are indeed to be pitied. If not afforded an opportunity for proper training outside the home, they are debarred from many privileges that by right every child should enjoy. This is the light that has been presented to me. Those who are unable to train their children aright should never have assumed the responsibility of parents. But because of their mistaken judgment, shall we make no effort to help their little ones to form right characters? God desires us to deal with these problems sensibly. And this is, she's basically saying, look here, take your children in. They shouldn't have to suffer because the parents are not able to fulfill their responsibilities. And that is the type of person you see coming off in her writings. Another example, I did not put this one in here, where she makes mention several times that schools should be established away from the cities. But she had to correct the brethren when She said, look here, in some places, there are some people who cannot afford, who must live and work in the cities. So for these individuals, establish schools in the cities, but the ideal is establish it outside of the city. Look at this. When you talk about an individual and the type person she was, she has a housekeeper. Sister Nelson, she said, you may see things in my son Willie you do not approve of. I may make mistakes, and my son Willie may make mistakes. I may be lost at last, and my son Willie may be lost. Walking with Ellen White, page 43. Basically, she's saying, hey, we're not perfect. There was a lot of contention with one of her sons who really gave her a whole heap of problems. And we're going to come to that right now. But the last one, when I talk about being a practical individual, she had a guard dog whose name, Tiglath-Pileser. You know, from our quarterly, this was one of the kings of Assyria who was taunting the Jews, but what he could do and how many persons were not able to stop him. And that was to protect her garden and orchard while she was in Australia because people there were stealing. And this was someone they interviewed who knew her when in Australia. Apparently, I duplicated myself there. Now, I want to go back, what I had skipped when we first started, marriage and separation, conflict and control. And for that, we're going to a YouTube. Someone has uploaded something that I want you to see with the few minutes we have left. So we're going to start at 9 minutes. One second, let me share the sound.
Was the text and email
okay.
of the day.
Can you hear it now? Give me a thumbs
up. A bit
up
of dissonance
or something, please.
is first evident in a letter from
Can you hear the sound?
James to Ellen, in which James, then in Battle Creek, writes to his wife in Oakland. He says to Ellen, it is very wonderful that the Lord is raising up such young men as this brother Morris. He is smart, good looking, humble, and feels his dependence on the Lord. What wonderful evidence these are that the Lord is working as never before in the minds of the intelligent. I cannot be denied. Willie and Mary must close up with that unworthy people on the Pacific in October and go to Europe. This will be a leitmotif in James's writings to Ellen and his son Willie. He was at loggerheads, at odds with the Adventists in California. He says, I trust the Lord will lead you in duty. If you feel free to write and are not urged by the Spirit to attend camp meetings, by all means, stay. But for mercy's sake, don't spend your strength over unthankful souls in California. Save your power for more worthy subjects. Should you come, I shall join you. Should you stay, I shall let Smith and Kenwright have the field, and I will write most of the time. He says, in closing, tell all the members of my dear family the Lord is very good and precious to me. I take time for the Lord to bless me. I am free and shall keep out of all such hard places as I was when at Oakland. In Oakland, James had founded the Pacific Press Publishing House in 1875, which is pictured here. However, as he tended to do post-strokes, James grumbled about the ungrateful way he was treated by the operation he had founded, and specifically the Adventists in California, stating that he was not remunerated fairly for his services and was left to bear the financial brunt of the costly enterprise. He also had personality differences with several Adventists in California. Essentially, and I hope that this is not an unfair characterization, he wanted to be the sole person in charge of the work, with his word as law. When Ellen chose to not travel east with him and remain in California, James began to resent her and, in some respects, lumped her in with the distaste he felt for Californian Adventists. And then there was Edson. Look at what James writes to his son, Willie, then 21 at the time, about his older brother, Edson, then 26. Edson sends me the enclosed, which teaches nothing to the point. He speaks of circumstances which should not have caused him to do wrong. In the most unqualified terms, I wish here to state that he created the circumstances. All the error I can see on my part was staying at the office at all after he commenced his abusive course. I did not speak or act wrong in this case. I spoke and acted right, but I hurt myself in being where I had to feel his words and see his rash conduct. I can never balm that matter with Edson. Willie may confess, I cannot, only that I should have left for the East according to my conviction. This complicates our narrative because it seems to indicate that James also may have left for the East on March 22, 1876, because of a disagreement, an argument with Edson. He continues, Edson will have to bear all the blame of leaving the office and exposing a breach in the family before the jealous ones in California. It was a cruel thing. I send you a line in reply to his, which please hand to him. Willie, please let your mother read all this. Counsel with her about her work. I have not a word to say against your mother staying, as long as she can and will write with freedom. I see no haste about a volume before camp meetings to sell them. I see no way to do anything in Union looking over copy and printing while separated. When your mother comes, I will help her. If you and she and May wish to go ahead, I will not hinder. I have more to do than I ever can do, which is of most importance. I have as full as clear light to write books as your mother, and perhaps they are of equal importance to the cause. If mother and May do not come, so we can look over matter at camp meeting and prepare her sketches, I think I shall attend only a very few of the camp meetings this year.
Notice the conflict.
In truth, Edson was a constant embarrassment to his father, with James disparaging Edson's behavior to Ellen, Willie, Edson's wife Emma, and to Edson himself. Let's take a quick look at Edson and his upbringing to better understand how all this came about. We noted at the start of this presentation that Ellen gave birth to Edson in 1849, when she and James were in the midst of founding a denomination. Edson was the Whites' second born, but would become the eldest when his brother Henry died from pneumonia at age 16 in 1863. His brother Willie was born 5 years after him. Edson had a tough life from the start. I want to state very clearly here that I believe James and Ellen loved Edson and did their best to raise him. With that said, though, they seem to have made some critical errors in his rearing. Edson's parents were focused myopically on church work, his dad being the movement's main leader and his mom, the prophet. When Edson was yet an infant, Ellen made the decision to largely let others care for her son so that she could mother the church. Here is what she wrote about that critical decision. Although the cares that came upon us in connection with the publishing work and other branches of the cause involved much perplexity, the greatest sacrifice I was called to make in connection with the work was to leave my children to the care of others. Henry had been from us 5 years and Edson had received but little of our care. For years, our family was very large and our home like a hotel. And we from that home much of the time. I had felt the deepest anxiety that my children should be brought up free from evil habits. And I was often grieved as I thought of the contrast between my situation and that of others who would not take burdens and cares, who could ever be with their children to counsel and instruct them, and who spent their time almost exclusively in their own families. And I have inquired, does God require so much of us and leave others without burdens? Is this equality? Are we to be thus hurried on from one care to another, one part of the work to another, and have but little time to bring up our children? Many nights while others are sleeping have spent by me in bitter weeping. I would plan some course more favorable for my children than objections would rise, which would sweep away these plans. Make him happy.
I'm going to jump to something else, but There was a lot of tension at this point. As you see, she concentrated on the work and forgot about the other work, which was her family, because she had to take care of the Lord's work. There was constant friction between her and her husband. When you listen to the entire video, look it up on YouTube, Ellen White's separation from her husband. And eventually we're going to see where it's going to create problems with her and James. One of the things this slide is showing that's on your screen, she's writing to their little Willie. And let me see, I can just pick out. We hope little Willie is well and happy, striving to be a good, obedient boy. We shall be glad to see you, my dear boy, again, and hear your loving voice. We want you to be good, pleasant, and lovely. Notice this next phrase, then everyone will love you. So the love is now conditional on his behavior. You must often visit your grandparents and try to make them happy. Do not grieve them by being noisy, but be quiet, mild, and gentle. Then they will love you. And she talks about us. They were riding in the cars, 3 children in the seat, little boy about your age. Look at this last paragraph. I thought then how bad I should feel if my little Willie was so disagreeable. Now, Willie, that wicked voice, pretty clothes, and handsome face did not make people love him. His behavior was bad and made those who had the care of him ashamed of him. All seemed pleased to get rid of the troublesome little fella. If Willie acts prettily, if he is gentle, kind, and obedient, his father and mother and all good people will love him. You see where she was making a mistake right there. I'm going to jump to 26.
You have not been treated as a father should treat a son.
Conflict between
Remember
father
what was
and son.
shown me in Rochester, that Satan has smitten the father that he might destroy the children. Thwart the purposes of Satan. She writes in the postscript, Willie has been a great help to me. He is good and true, the best boy I ever knew. Continuing, this triangular rift was at its worst in 1876 and is on full display here in James's letter to Willie, in which he mentions Edson. He writes, I want you to watch his mother, that is Ellen, and not let him lose, not let Edson lose, or bring a disgrace upon himself and the family. If he, Edson, gets into a hard spot, take measures to help him out, or even to raise means for him. He will always be a burden to us, more or less, and we must do the best we can with the matter. We should wait, however, until he, Edson, gets where he must have help, then help him as little as we'll possibly do. So this summary brings us to May of 1876. And here is the status, as it were, of each of the members of the White family. James is in Battle Creek since March 22, handling administrative duties and getting ready for the camp meeting tour. Ellen is in Oakland writing. Edson and Willie are in Oakland working with the Pacific Press Publishing House and other Adventist efforts, and there is intense acrimony between James and Ellen over Edson, and Willie is caught in between. And so is Lucinda Hall. Lucinda was an Adventist woman in her late 30s from New York State. who had worked for the white family since 1861. Variously as a housekeeper, nanny to the boys, and literary assistant to Ellen and James. She was practically a member of the family. Beyond that, Lucinda was Ellen's close friend and confidant. Ellen White said of her, "I prize her society, and no other one can fill her place to us. Her worth cannot be estimated by its weight in gold. She is my twin sister in Christ." Another time, "I wish I could see you, Lucinda. How I have missed you on this journey. Not but that I have friends, but you are nearest and dearest, next to my own family, and I feel no differences than that you belong to me, and my blood flowed in your veins." In May of 1876, while Ellen was in Oakland, Lucinda was in Battle Creek. Lucinda was thus closer to James, and Ellen depended on her to keep her updated on her husband. Ellen also confided her inner thoughts on her husband to Lucinda. As are many Christians who believe they are supposed to always be strong, supposed to always speak well of people, and always keep family business private, Ellen was plagued by guilt about confiding her intimate thoughts to Lucinda and charged her, "Burn all my letters, and I will relate no matters that perplex me to you. I will not be guilty of uttering a word again, whatever may be the circumstances. Silence in all things of a disagreeable or perplexing character has ever been a blessing to me. When I have departed from this, I have regretted it so much." But of course, Lucinda did not burn the letters. And almost a century later, they were discovered in an old trunk and quickly purchased by the Ellen G. White estate. The content of these letters were touched on in Arthur White's multi-volume biography of his grandmother. And some of them were published in the 1998 compilation Daughters of God, and they are all available on egwritings.org today. Here are the letters.
I want you to take note of some of the things they
On
say.
May 10, 1876, Ellen White wrote to Lucinda, and this is after a month and a half of being apart from James. "We received your letter last evening. We also received one from James. Lucinda, I have no idea now of exchanging a certainty for an uncertainty. I can write more and am free. Should I come east, James's happiness might suddenly change to complaining and fretting. I am thoroughly disgusted with this state of things and do not mean to place myself where there is the least liability of its occurring. The more I think of the matter, the more settled and determined I am, unless God gives me light, to remain where I am. I can never have an opportunity such as God has favored me with at the present. I must work as God should direct. I plead and entreat for light. If it is my duty to attend the camp meetings, I shall know it." She says, "I can but dread the liability of James's changeable moods, his strong feelings, his censures, his viewing me in the light he does, and has felt free to tell me his ideas of my being led by a wrong spirit, my restricting his liberty, etc. All this is not easy to jump over and place myself voluntarily in a position where he will stand in my way and I in his. No, Lucinda, no camp meeting shall I attend this season. God in his providence has given us each our work, and we will do it separately, independently. He is happy, I am happy, but the happiness might be all changed should we meet, I fear. Your judgment I prize, but I must be left free to do my work." And Lucinda was trying to convince her to reunite with her husband and to come east and join him on the camp meeting circuit.
So what I'm basically showing, they had problems in their marriages, just like probably all of us, most of us anyway. And many persons cannot fathom that the prophet, the servant of the Lord, was basically, if you want to look at it for lack of a better phrase, separate from her husband at this point. She's like, I can't deal with James' mood James White was writing and Ellen wanted to control him. Ellen was saying James wanted to control her. And there was this tension between them as to who. And so he's like, okay, you stay over there and work. I'm going to stay over here and work. And as you see the challenges they face with the children. So all of this is to help us understand the individual, that prophets are not perfect. I always remind people of Abraham. When God told the king, said, give the man back his wife. He's a prophet and he will pray for you. Now, most of us would not have called Abraham a prophet at that stage because he still had his wife in the house of this king. I don't remember if it was Egypt or the other guy. God said, restore the man his wife. He's a prophet, he's going to pray for you. But God does not see things the way we do. So we're going to stop there. It's 8:34. By the way, just before I close, if you have a question to ask, I just unmuted, allow you to unmute the mics. I wanted to show you some of this information. Now, which one are you seeing? The information that I shared with you from ellenwhite.org with her library, I'll close that. This is a new version of her writings. They're making a new layout rather. beta.egwritings.org. So that's the other one where you can find her information. You click on collections. You choose, let's say, English, 509 books, 201 references, in references, 29 Bibles, Adventist Pioneer Library. So they have quite a bit of writing. All of our writings are available online, and you can listen to some in audiobooks. You can find it in the Google Play Store, the Apple Store, they're free. Ellen White Encyclopedia, which I made brief passing mention to. You can find it for the Kindle, hardcover, $65.84. I prefer to use the digital version. With Logos, it's $59.99. And the reason for that is it's hyperlinked. So when I pull up something from the encyclopedia, and it says education page 13 to 30, it's hyperlinked. I select that and it will open there. So that's one of the reasons why it may be a little more expensive, some people say, because all of the hyperlinks on it. Okay. Okay, those are some of the stuff I wanted to share with you. So any questions, comments of anything I've covered so far? Okay, those of you on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you have any questions or comments, anything I've covered, you can type it in the chat. So everything is clear as mud. Wonderful. There's quite a bit we have not covered. One, and for some reason I lost the quote. I saw it in Knight's book where she spoke. Apparently they slept in separate bedrooms. Someone said that would have been because when she went off in vision in the night, it was disturbing. I don't know. But she wrote to him in one of her letters that she missed his visits to her bedroom. So every now and then he would get up in the middle of the night to go visit her bedroom. When it comes to Kellogg had some, and that's the one I couldn't find. Is there a part two? I can probably look at something. Kellogg wrote something where he was trying to get Ellen White to endorse some strange views on sexuality. Said finally got an opportunity to speak with her and she listened to him. When he was finished, she looked at him and said, "Are you finished?" He said, "Yes." And her response was, "Go home and be a man." I always found that amazing, and I cannot find the story. I've read it before, but I cannot find it. I'd probably, like Ben said, do a part two to find it. But she's not this rigid, stringent person we sometimes envision. She's a very practical, down-to-earth person. When Nix was here some years ago, he made mention of the fact that she allowed her children, her grandchildren, sorry, to have a pillow fight. I think it was once a week. And she knew the housekeeper would not allow them to come up and visit us. So they had a plan where they would sneak around the back of those and come through the back stairs. They could visit with their grandmother for a few minutes, then sneak back out without the housekeeper knowing. So she was a very down-to-earth person, I would call it. Someone whom children would love to have as a grandmother. Knight talks about how she had little treats for the grandchildren, how she would encourage them in their games. And as you saw, she encouraged teachers to join the children in their games. So we need to dismiss this idea of her being this rigid person. No, she had problems in a marriage. She had trouble with her weight. If you look up any of her pictures online, you will see she was only about 5'2". I was surprised. And in the later pictures, let's share this one for you. You look at some of these pictures, this would have been her in her younger days. This is as she's getting older. She is definitely much older here. Typical garment that they wore. Men, as you can see, generally wore their beards. This had been a picture when she's much advanced in age here. This is another one here. Okay, this is an even better one here, Loma Linda University. And so she had her challenges like everyone else. God chose her as a messenger, not because she was perfect or flawless, but because he chose her. That's the bottom line. God is sovereign. He does as he wishes. These are some more pictures. This is the way we like to mention her, but she got older. At one point, she looked like this here, Center for Advanced Research. And so we just have to remember that this is her with her children when they were young. Okay, next there. So once we understand that she was a real human being with all of the limitations and faults of human beings, we're free to let her be who she is and enjoy the work that she has done. She had her flaws like all other Bible writers. Paul lied. I know Bible teachers would disagree with me when he said, "Brethren, I didn't realize that was the high priest." A man of Paul's standing didn't know who the high priest was, even by voice. If he had an eye problem, I find that hard to believe. He probably has tried to pull one, but he was a human being. We don't discredit the Psalms that David wrote because he was a murderer and an adulterer, and he was hot-tempered, and he was a womanizer. When he became king, he had 7 children by 6 different women. Let's take it for granted that he married all of them. It still shows you that was common in his day and time. You had multiple wives. And when he became king, he inherited Saul's harem. Because the Lord said, "Why did you take Bathsheba? I gave you your master's wives. If that wasn't sufficient, I'd have given you more." They don't discredit David because of that either. Or Peter, who was a racist. After Acts 10, when he had the vision and God says, "Call no man common unclean," Paul still had to raise him up in Galatians chapter 2 for being a racist. When some Jews came down from Antioch, all of a sudden Peter couldn't hang out with Gentiles no more. He just disassociated himself. And Paul chastised him publicly. But do we take good voice in 2 Peter of the Bible because of his racist attitudes? No. So once we realize that, we free the messenger to be a human being while still being a messenger. Someone said there was a man sent from God whose name was John, but the fact is John was a man. He had his doubts too after a while. Are you the one or should we look for somebody else? Because you're not doing what I thought you would be doing by now. Questions, comments? Okay, I'll probably look at a part 2 another time. I did one at Centerville some time ago, Ellen White and Education and Health. I don't know if I can still find those documents, but maybe we'll look at something else. If you have something you want me to look at, then drop me a line, email, or call me. You have my number and let me know what you're interested in. So let me see, anyone in the chat? Okay, no chats online either. Okay then, thanks so much and good evening and God bless you.